Rodney, can you tell your last name for me?
Yeah, Trujillo.
Trujillo is joining us today to talk about his work in civil engineering. And Rodney is from the Aptos area. He also went to Cabrillo, and he now works with County of Santa Cruz Sanitation District. And I'm going to let him give the rest of his introduction. As he talks about his background and how he got into work that he does today.
Cool. Yeah, so my
Rodney, if
name,
they have questions, should they interrupt you or should they type them into the chat? What would you prefer?
interrupting me is fine. Either way is fine. Let me open up the chat window. I'm not great with Zoom, so bear with me, but yeah, I'm fine with questions. I may be a little all over the place, so feel free to interrupt me. And there's so much information and so much, detail on like how you get, how did I get here? Why am I doing this? Um, but I grew up in Aptos, went to Aptos High for a couple of years. I was there freshman, sophomore year before doing a homeschool thing, partially because I wanted to work construction. I really had this goal of being a carpenter and building houses, did that for a few years. Partially it was because my grades were terrible. I had like a 1.17 GPA, that's including like PE and art and woodshop. So school was not like, it was not one of my priorities at that time. But yeah, I went to work for a couple of local contractors. Long story short, I had some back injuries that made me kind of rethink my whole career trajectory and thought, you know what, maybe school's worth looking into. Maybe college is a good thing. So I signed up at Cabrillo, taking some general ed classes, kind of feeling out what I wanted to do. Um, ended up, I thought I might want to do computer programming. I took a programming class and thought that's debugging code wasn't for me long term. And then ended up eventually talking to Joanne Panzardi about engineering and what that entailed. And she kind of gave me a roadmap, which was super helpful for, okay, if you want to do this, these are the classes you need to take. If you want to go to San Jose State or Cal Poly or wherever you want to go, here's the roadmap to get there, which was super helpful because I had no sense of what prerequisites were necessary for which classes and all that. So if you haven't talked to her or your instructor about any of that stuff, I would highly recommend looking at all that and seeing what the path ahead of you looks like. But I'm getting sidetracked. So I didn't really know what an engineer did. I didn't know any engineers. I had one friend whose dad was an engineer, and they were a mechanical engineer, and they designed like I think it was custom elevators, as I understood it, for weird applications. But it seemed interesting, and it didn't involve a lot of writing. He did a lot of design primarily. So that's what got me on that path. But so I took a lot of most of the engineering classes available at the time at Cabrillo. What I needed for transfer, especially, kind of struggled my way through it first because I didn't really have the study skills necessary. And so a lot of my time was just figuring out how to learn, how to study. But by the time I transferred, and I felt well prepared. I transferred to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which has a great engineering program, good reputation. I ended up graduating from there in, I think, 2005 with a bachelor's of science in civil engineering. While I was going to school, I got a part-time job working for an engineering company out in San Luis Obispo that did general civil engineering. I don't know if you guys have talked about different sub-disciplines within civil at all, or
They should be, they had some videos to watch to prepare for today that talked about the 6 different subdisciplines.
okay, cool. Yeah, so everything's a little things become specialized as time goes on. So I studied structural engineering. That was kind of my focus. I tried to keep my studies a little broad, but that was really where my interests were. So a lot of multi-story concrete and steel building design, bridge design. But then I got a job working part-time for a general engineering firm. And at the time, I had no idea what general engineering civil was. Um, but we'd work on grading plans. At the time, I didn't know what that was, but basically everything around a building, it's all the site design. So where you're going to remove dirt, where you're going to put more dirt, how you're going to contour all the paving and parking to where it drains in a particular way. What are you going to do with all the stormwater? Is it just going to run off site? Or now we have a lot of requirements to infiltrate that water on site and actually treat it through soil media and different methods before it gets into the ground, which is pretty important now that we're hitting drought times, and it seems to be an ongoing challenge around the world. So it's a lot of the site design is what I got involved with, and it caught my attention because there's always a lot of puzzles. It was a mix of outdoor work and indoor work. With my construction background, it really was interesting because I'd get to go out and see these sites, some developed, some completely undeveloped, and then I'd work on project teams. Which was nice because you work with an architect or landscape architect, structural engineers, soils engineers, and then it becomes this collaborative thing where you still get to design and work on the nuts and bolts of solving the puzzle, but then there's a social aspect of getting to know all these other professionals you work with, and that's part of what the appeal for me. I didn't realize there was as much of a social and relational aspect to engineering. But so I worked at that place while going to school. And then after graduation, I moved back to Santa Cruz and got a job for Whitson Engineers in Monterey. And they do general civil land development type stuff. And they have a real mix of public projects and private projects. And similar work to what I did while I was working part-time while going to school. So it was a pretty natural transition. So that was anything from housing development projects to road widening type projects. I designed a few like on-ramps for freeways. They did some neat projects, like they did track redesigns for Laguna Seca Raceway. So I had a chance to work on some turn geometry for the track out there, kind of conceptual designs of pedestrian bridges that go over the track. So you work on a real variety of stuff in general civil engineering, and that's a thing that appealed to me because it was always new, always interesting, but still related to what you're learning. You're building on this knowledge base, but you're still a little uncomfortable because there's always something new to study or learn about.
And how did you make the transition from sort of structural work or geotechnical work to sanitation?
Yeah. Okay. So after working at Whitson, I went after the job working for the county, primarily for a different life balance. So I strategically worked for Whitson Engineers because they had a reputation that for doing good work. They cared about their work. They had good clients, good projects, a mix of public and private, and they had a culture where they would really develop people. So I started there as an assistant engineer, worked my way to an associate engineer, project manager, and eventually managed a branch office in Santa Cruz. So they had a real development path where they'd pair you with someone, you'd have a mentor, and you'd have a lot of resources. With that, you did a lot of work and you worked a lot of hours, and which is what I wanted. I wanted to learn as much as I could, all aspects from conception to construction. But there came a point when I felt like I have 3 kids. That's part of it. And I wanted a different life balance. I wanted to slow down, and I could have done it there. I could have they would have been flexible enough. But I was there, what, 13 years, I think.
Wow.
So I thought I'd try something new working for a public agency and see what I would learn that you don't know what you don't know, I guess. So so I thought I'd try a new job in a new situation and see what else there is to learn. So and then with that, it came with a pretty predictable schedule, 40 hours a week, fixed hours, good benefits, everything. It was kind of a life balance thing was part of it. And part of it was just my own curiosity about trying something new. And in all honesty, my concern with switching was, will it be interesting enough? Am I going to get bored? Because so I work in sanitation, so it's sewer conveyance, so it's pipes underground and pump stations. I don't really know anything about pump stations, so that intrigued me. But it's really one component of general civil. So just designing the sewer component, it's not the stormwater component, it's not the grading and drainage and earthwork component. But it turns out it's been really interesting, and there's been a lot to learn that I didn't know I needed to learn, or that so that's kind of how I got into it. And some of the challenges or the interesting things to learn is, I pictured, it's pipe in the ground, you make sure it flows downhill, and you just dig a hole and bury it back up again. And sometimes that's what we do. But a lot of times our sites are impacted. We have sensitive waterways that we need to go underneath. So we do things like horizontal directional drilling, which is where you drill a pilot hole under the creek, and then you end up pulling a big section of pipe under the creek. That way you don't have to disturb the creek by trenching through it, that sort of thing. Or there's other technologies, trenchless technologies like pipe bursting, where you'll have an existing pipe. It'll be one diameter and you'll pull a bigger pipe through it, right? So all of that was new to me. And then I realized there's plenty of puzzles to be solved still. There's always constraints, environmental constraints. There's other utilities nearby. If you think about driving down the roadway, what you don't see is there's storm drains in the roadway. There's electrical utilities. There's water utilities. There's all kinds of stuff in there, and it's always it's challenging to figure out where to put the new utilities. So yeah, so one thing in engineering, any branch of engineering, but what I've experienced in civil is there's always stuff to learn. And when I start to feel like I have some level of expertise in one area, there's a whole world of other information to learn. And that's probably what drew me to engineering in the first place is you learn how the world around you works. And then so the curiosity of that stuff interested in me. But now part of it is I realize how much of a contribution engineering is to society, right? So working for a public agency, I have some say over how our money's spent and responsible use of funds for projects. And I feel like I'm contributing to where I live. I had that before at my other job too, with the community housing stuff in particular. Was really neat to hear how that would impact people's lives. For the affordable housing, lower income housing, just giving that sort of stability and to families.
As these students are sort of embarking on their engineering journey, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah. So when I was studying engineering, I guess part of the concerns or questions in my mind was well, one, do I have what it takes? Can I do this? And then the other one was, can I afford college? I didn't have any mechanism, set up to pay for it. So one is, yeah, you can do it. I was not a good student. I had some learning challenges, and I had to like learn how to learn. Everything I was supposed to do in high school, I had to kind of just do later on, a little later on in life. But I did really well at Cabrillo ultimately, and at Cal Poly, and I've done really well in my career. So you can totally do it. The people I've seen who have didn't do it was only because they didn't stick with it. You don't have to be. You just have to have a work ethic, which takes time to develop. I guess the other piece is on the financial end would be apply for any scholarship you see available. I would have, in retrospect, I would have applied for a lot more scholarships.
Oh, okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
At what age did you start your college career, and at what age did you graduate?
Yeah. So I was 18. So when I started taking classes at Cabrillo, I eventually graduated. I would have been 22. Is that right? Yeah, 22. Actually, I was 17 actually when I started taking classes, but I almost can't count that year because I took like, what was it, English 100, I think, one of the earlier English classes. I took that several times. I took math classes that I didn't pass and had to repeat. I wasn't ready at the time for the homework load and that sort of thing. It took me a whole year to kind of figure out what I was doing. So actually, that can't be right. The math's off. Okay, I graduated 2005. So I would have been 25. That's how old I was. So pretty much from 18 to 25. So I spent a little more time than was necessary probably, because at first I was taking some random classes. It took me a while to get a goal in mind, a specific goal.
Okay. And once you did transfer from Cabrillo, how were the classes compared to the university, compared to the workload at a community college?
I felt like I was well prepared, and the workload in general was less when I transferred. There were exceptions. There were a couple of classes that were especially hard, and I don't know if it was the workload or if it was just for me personally, those classes were just tough to grasp. It could have been the teaching as well. Certain teaching styles I do better with than others, but in general, I would say it was less work once I transferred. I was working more at that time, even, and working more hours. I felt like I could fit in more. So yeah, you'll be well prepared at transfer.
And once you did graduate, how soon or how hard was it to find your first job position? Or
yeah, so the difficulty of finding a job is definitely tied to the economy. I was real fortunate. I got a job right away. At the time, the economy was good. I put in 7 applications to companies, and I got six good offers. And I had planned to actually send out more applications. Some of these applications weren't even the places I was real serious about. I just wanted to do some test interviews to get myself warmed up, because I felt awkward in those sort of situations. But it all went surprisingly well despite my own awkwardness. In general, engineers are hard to find. It seems when I worked for Whitson, I was responsible for hiring, and we did a lot of recruitment, and it was it was hard to find somebody who, if you're passionate about what you do and you care about what you do, I don't think you'll have a problem getting a job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there other questions? Okay.
I have
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
For it, Lalo.
So with your job position,
Yeah.
at first, was it like, were you kind of nervous about going into work? And if you were, did it kind of ease off as you got used to it?
Yeah. So I was nervous every day, scared to death. It's almost what it felt like. Because there's a mix of, okay, there's part of it's just my personality. And part of it is there's a lot to learn when you first start a job. It can seem overwhelming, but I would say about a year into it, I started feeling comfortable. I actually got, when I got my job at Whitson, I committed to staying there for a year no matter what. I got about a month into it and felt like I was in over my head and like I wouldn't be able to keep up with the pace, and that it was really challenging for me. I was always nervous about getting deadlines done, and but in retrospect, everything worked out. But even once I got to the 1 year point, I was sort of questioning, is this for me? Is this really what I want to do long term? But at that point, so to get your professional license, you need 2 years of qualifying experience. I already had a year in, so I thought, well, if I do 1 more year, I'll have my professional license. I'll have that forever. That'll be useful for something. So I committed to sticking to it for 2 years. And after that point, I felt really comfortable. Something clicked. I felt like I was actually good at what I did, and that I actually had some engineering judgment. The hard part about the first couple of years is you're pretty green. Even though you have the schooling background, there's just so much to learn on the job there's just judgment calls. And there's no way to learn the nuances of the judgment calls other than to learn it from another engineer and then see some of these things built. Like an example is something as simple as like, well, how steep should a parking lot be, or can it be? We have a big hillside project. We want to put a flat parking lot, but we don't want big retaining walls. So there's just some rules of thumb with, well, if your cross slope of your parking stall is too steep, when you open your door, it's going to swing into somebody else's car. So that's not a great design. So, but how flat is flat enough? How steep is too steep? So it's stuff like that the more senior engineers know. They do this stuff every day and they can give you guidance. But it's hard when you sit down with this puzzle, but you don't have all the you don't have all the judgment calls worked out in your own mind yet. So that's why I'd recommend when you get a job, try and figure out if there's a culture of mentoring. The first place I worked, I'm not going to name it, while I was going to school, they did not have a culture of mentoring, and it was kind of a figure it out as you on your own thing. And their culture was such that if you come in as a drafter, they are perfectly happy keeping you there as a drafter for the rest of your life. And if they want a project manager, they'll just hire a project manager that has experience. They don't want to develop employees. And it was a weird first experience because from talking with other engineers, that's not typical. It seems like most places do have a culture of developing employees, and because it's kind of burned into the engineering ethos, right? That we develop the next generation, and that's part of what we do. It's our responsibility as an engineer. But it's worth asking. So, yeah.
Rodney,
Thank you.
do you you mentioned, you've worked in, I would say, like the consulting field,
Yeah.
and now a government type job. And I know that you touched on just the lifestyle change, but I think it'd be interesting for the students to know, like, as a consultant, are you talking about 60, 80 hours a week? Like, how the different industries function. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I was working 60, 70 hours a week is what I was working. Not all the time, but there'd be periods where I would. And part of that was challenged by choice. Because I wanted to work into a position where I was managing an office and where I was bringing in new work, but I still wanted to be designing projects. I may have a tendency to bite off a little more than I can chew because I like challenges. I might have control issues. I don't know, but but that wasn't everyone's experience where I worked. There were some people who did work 40 hours a week in general, but there always seems to be a need for overtime because projects in the consulting world are deadline based, and what you have, your most marketable feature is your reputation. And if you have a reputation for meeting deadlines and getting projects done on budget and always being able to get the job done in an efficient timeline, then you're going to be, number one on the list for the next project that comes up from that developer or from that architect or the public agency that's putting out the project. So some of it is self-inflicted pressure. Like there were times when I think I probably could have extended deadlines and given myself more buffer, but was maybe afraid to, because I wanted to be somebody who met every deadline. So maybe there may have been personal pride issue in with that. Little self-analysis.
Was there also a remarkable pay difference between working in the private industry versus the public sector?
Surprisingly, not as big of a pay difference as you would expect.
Okay.
There definitely can be, and there were bonuses, so the pay structure would be different. Like we'd have a good year, and there might be a huge bonus. Like one year, I got a $20,000 bonus at Christmas time, unexpected. Like, hey, you're doing a good job. Here you go, and I just like went and bought a car. So I'm like. So stuff like that does not happen in the public agency, but you have a predictable wage and it's a good living wage and you have good benefits. So it's
and it's 40 hours a week, not a bit of overtime.
Not a bit of overtime. Yeah.
And you're doing public good. Like there's service in there,
There is service in there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's all essential infrastructure that affects us all. Sometimes it might not seem like the most glamorous type of project, sewer pipes underground, but it's so, and you don't think about them until they break, until there's a spill.
Do you find yourself at the water treatment plant, or are you more out in the field at other locations?
Yeah, so I'm doing mostly office work right now. You can kind of chart your own path in civil engineering. If some people end up doing just design, for their whole career, some people end up getting in the more inspection fields, and they're out in the field looking at projects a lot more. I've stayed more on the design end. So the majority of my time is inside, but for all these projects, there's things to look at. There's field reconnaissance. I get involved during construction a bit and get to see what's going on and make field decisions when things are being built. So but yeah, mostly I'm designing. I'm actually designing from my home office / music room here.
And are you using a particular software to do that?
Yeah, Autodesk Civil 3D.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also part of what I do for the county is I do their sewer flow modeling. So we have a program called InfoSwim. So I'll do the hydraulic modeling for all the county's sewers.
Cool. Well, we don't want to keep you too long. Does anyone have any lingering questions for Rodney? Okay, well then I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us and giving us a glimpse of the work you do and your educational path. It's really great to hear
Yeah,
how you found your way.
yeah, you can totally do it. There's times that are challenging with random physics classes but you get over those hurdles and just do it.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for joining us, Rodney.
Yeah, my pleasure.